Looks like we have everyone except for Tony. But you have a quorum, sir. You can start the meeting whenever you're ready.
Okay, so let's call the special meeting of August 11th, 2022 of the Pajaro Valley Healthcare Hospital Corporation to order. Would you poll the board for attendance, please?
Yes, sir. Gabriel Cox.
Here.
There we are. Nahara.
Here.
Nunez. Pimentel.
Here.
And Friel.
Here.
We have quorum.
And so I just lost my agenda, so let's see.
And I just saw Tony join us. So Tony, would you just took roll? So,
Thank you.
Nunez.
Here.
Perfect. Thank you.
So Chair, you're on item number 2,
yeah.
consideration of late.
Consideration of late additions. I found my agenda. Thank you, Monica.
We don't have
You-
any late
We
agenda
don't have
items,
anything.
Chair.
Okay. Is there anybody for a public comment at this point? Would you read the instructions, please?
Yes, sir.
Erwin, thank you.
Now is the time for public comment. If you wish to comment, please find the hand icon on the bottom of your screen and click on the icon to raise your hand. I'll call you by name when it is your turn to speak. We ask that you please state your name at the beginning of your comment. Once you begin speaking, the timer will start. The countdown timer will display on your screen. If you're calling in by phone, please dial *9 to join the speaker queue. This will virtually raise your hand. I will identify you by the last 4 digits of your phone number. Please dial *6 to unmute yourself and begin to speak. At the end of your 2 minutes, your microphone will be muted. Ahora es el tiempo que la Junta de los Directores recibirá comentarios del público. Si gustaría dar su testimonio en español, tenemos servicios de traducción disponibles para asistir. Si desea comentar, busque el icono de la mano en el fondo de la pantalla y haga clic para levantar la mano. Esto lo colocará en la fila para hablar. Cuando sea su turno de hablar, le llamaré por su nombre y verá una ventana emergente en su pantalla, preguntándole si quiere activar su micrófono. Por favor, acepte y comience a hablar. Si se ha unido a través del teléfono, por favor marque *9 para levantar la mano y estar colocado en la fila para hablar. Cuando sea su turno, le llamaré por los últimos 4 dígitos de su número de teléfono. Por favor, marque *6 para activar su micrófono. Al final de sus 2 minutos, su micrófono será desactivado automáticamente. Gracias. Thank you.
Thank you. So I'd just like to remind anybody that's thinking of speaking, it is limited to 2 minutes and it has to be directed to the board about an agenda item for tonight's session. So is there anyone that wishes to speak to the board at this time? Erwin, is there anybody in the queue?
I am looking in the speaker queue, sir, and there's no one with a raised hand up.
Okay. So with that, we'll close the public comment period and move on to action on the consent items. Items 8 through 9, any comment on them?
No comment. I'll move for approval of the consent items 8 through 9.
I'll second
Thank you,
that, Chair. And this
Thank
is
you,
Director
gentlemen.
Nunez.
Thank you, gentlemen. So you poll the board, please, on the consent item approval.
Yes, sir. Gabriel Cox,
Aye.
Nahara,
Aye.
Nunez,
Aye.
Pimentel,
Aye.
and Friel.
Aye,
The motion carries.
thank you. So moving to our regular agenda, item number 5, the Second Amendment, which is an action item. Monica, are you going to give us a background on this, please?
Yeah, I wanted to specifically call this one out for you guys, is to ratify the secondment agreement between the project, the hospital, and the hospital corporation itself. So, over the past couple of months, as you guys have been aware, we have been in partnership with the current seller. And part of that, we've learned very quickly that we also needed expertise. And so I wanted to flag specifically this for you, because what this really entails is that we were able to start working directly with some of their staff members in HR, Allison Hawk and Adriana Barajas, to start helping with the transition. And so what you'll see here is that I signed this a few days back just to get the ball rolling, to start really introducing these individuals as part of the hospital corp. And I just really wanted to just identify and flag this specific item for you for consideration in ratifying the secondment agreement. So I think it's an important milestone for where you're at. The fact that now you're actually starting to have staff under the hospital corp. So I'll leave it at that and answer any questions that folks might have.
Any questions for Monica on the board?
Just
On the board.
confirming logistically, I mean, this particular hospital board does not yet have a budget or funding. So this is a partnership with the project for financing the staff who will be working on our behalf. You know, just stating the obvious, but I just want to make sure we're all clear about that.
Correct, Marcus. Thank you for that.
No questions. You know, I think Allison's
Yeah,
been a great resource for our team.
Just
So
would like to make a comment that we're very fortunate that the people that have been there through this transition are still there, and they've been very effective in getting this done. And I think we would all agree we couldn't have done it without them. So our hats are off to them. So does somebody want to make a motion that we approve this agreement?
I'd ask us to check with public comment and then come back to board action.
That's fine. Is there any comment from others on it? Any public comment on it?
Anyone wishing to speak on this item, please click on the raise hand option on your screen. I see none, Chair.
Okay, so we'll close the public comment. So did Marcus, did you move them to accept this, or?
No, but
Wait.
that is my motion to accept the staff's recommendation
thank
for
you.
the secondment agreement.
Thank you. And would someone like to second that, please?
I'll second that recommendation. This is Jasmine.
Thank you, Jasmine. Okay, so let's poll the board, please, that we accept this amendment.
Yes, sir.
I'm sorry, agreement.
Gabriel Cox,
Aye.
Nahara,
Aye.
Nunez,
Aye.
Pimentel,
Give me just a half second. County Council Jason Heath, I used the word accept instead of ratify. I imagine the intent is there in my motion.
What I heard you say is accept staff recommendation.
Yeah.
And the staff recommendation is to ratify the agreement.
Aye.
and Friel.
Aye.
The motion carries.
Thank you very much. Moving on to item number 6, which is the transition update, which is educational only. And Monica, do you want to tee that up for us? And I would imagine.
Yeah, it's our important agenda item and ongoing item for us for the next couple of weeks. And Cecilia, our consultant through both the project, will be here to give you guys a presentation on the latest status.
So did I miss something there? Is she going to do that now?
Yes, I think she's trying to unmute.
Oh, sorry. Beatrice, are you able to put up my presentation?
Yes, Erwin is gonna
Oh,
do
Erwin, sorry.
yeah.
Thank you. You know, I won't make my presentation too terribly long for you today. And so what I tried to do in this particular deck is just focus on things that I think, are worthy of your attention. You did, I believe, receive a copy of the weekly FTI transition report separately. And if you, after we talk about the big items, if you have any questions on the FTI report, I'm happy to take those too. There we go. Okay, we can go to the first slide. So here's the topics I wanted to cover with you today. I wanted to update you on the employee offer letters, on the insurance contract negotiations, on revenue cycle issues because of their impact on cash flow, the process that we are contemplating, no action on this, by the way, for the remaining executory contracts, which are many, also update you on licensure and the change of ownership with Medicare and Medi-Cal, and a couple of really important vendors discussions. Again, not action for you today, but things I really want you to be aware of. Okay,
Okay,
first, John?
go ahead.
Okay. So I'll start with employee offer letters. So at this juncture, all of the employment offer letters have gone to non-management employees. So that includes both people who are on full or part-time status, but also what is called per diem employees. These are employees who fill shifts at the hospital without benefits. So offer letters have gone out to everyone in those two categories. And just to clarify, for the employees who must bid on a position, the positions have been posted. And there is at least one part-time position for every shift in every clinical department. The HR staff is now staffing a help center for employees who have questions about their offer letters. And the employees must sign and return their offer letters by August 19th. This date, I think we discussed this previously, is an important date because it is more complicated than I thought to set people up in payroll. And we really need that time to make sure that there's no mistakes or interruption in payroll processing. So we will be tracking down people who we haven't heard from and making sure that there are no remaining questions. Maybe I'll pause. Any questions on the employee offer letter process?
Do you know the date that they were sent out, Cecilia? Thank you.
Well, it is a multi-step process for the hospital to send anything out to employees, and that they use a vendor who has the distribution list. So the letters all went to the vendor last Friday, the day after we last met. The vendor, now they had attachments. They had actually a fair number of attachments. And when the vendor tried to push to all employees, there actually was a kind of a system failure for portions of those employees for reasons unknown. So employees may have gotten them on Monday, they may have gotten them on Tuesday, but my understanding is that they have all gotten them earlier this week. But I'll admit, I know there was an email glitch with that vendor.
So as far as we know, they'll have about 10 days to consider and then submit their choice, right?
Yes, that's correct. About 10
And
days.
Cecilia, do we know if, I think maybe 2 weeks ago or so, we were told that they were going to stand up the HR department there, like a kiosk where I believe the old little snack area used to be. Did that end up happening? And is that available to the nurses?
Yes,
and the
that's
other?
my third bullet, this help center. And I think it is in the, there was a gift shop or some area that's in the lobby of the hospital.
Okay. And do we know if there's been a good response to that, or people have found that helpful in any sort of way?
I can get an update for you on that. Well, actually, I think now that we've ratified the secondment
Right.
agreement, we might want to ask Allison, working on your behalf as the buyer, to be available for updates on the employee process in your meetings, because she can now do that since she's formally engaged to do that.
Okay, perfect. Thank you.
She'll have way more information. Tony, it's not for me to call on you, but is there more questions?
No, I'm sorry. I had my hand raised. I'm sorry.
Okay. All right, we'll go to the next slide if there are no more questions. Insurance contract renegotiations. Feeling better about this today. So the Kaiser Permanente process is moving well. We've exchanged 2 rate proposals, but and I've seen them both. I really do believe that Kaiser recognized that their rates were below market, and even their first offer was a very sizable increase. So we're really pleased with where that discussion stands. I think I reported to you last week that we had a little hiccup I'll call it more than a little hiccup. We were kind of stalled with the Central Coast Alliance for Health. And, you know, that's such an important relationship in this community. I did, Stephanie Sunshine, the CEO there, did reach out to me. We had a phone call earlier this week, and it was a very good call. I think we got things back on a track, and they will be sending us a new proposal in the coming days. So I feel much better about that because they're a very important partner. The only way I'm frustrated with is Blue Shield. You know, the irony is that they're a capital contributor to our project, and we're just having trouble getting their contracting team to even respond to emails. So we're going to escalate that one a little bit because I am quite certain that Blue Shield is committed to this relationship. Had a great meeting with Western growers, learned a lot about who they are. They do provide both insured and self-insured products to a lot of the agricultural community in your area. So, and we had a good discussion with them. All the others, everything's moving along. You know, I'm so glad I'm not a managed care contracting person because these kinds of negotiations tend to just go right up to the wire. I'm sure you've all heard of like December 31st termination notices going out and they leave patients in the middle. I don't think that's going to happen here, but it is very customary for these to get done at the very end. But anyway, we'll be all right.
Oh, that's good news. Thank you for getting all
Absolutely.
that done in the last week.
Yeah. Okay. Next slide. Revenue cycle. You know, I presented to you last week a cash flow statement. It was probably a little hard to read, but what I'll highlight for you just as a preface, what it said. It does show, I think very realistically, that there'll be some lags on these initiatives. So as I indicated, even if all the contracts are perfectly in place and everybody has them in their information systems for patients that arrive in early September, that payment typically wouldn't even be processed well into October. So we expect some cash flow disruption that's been built into the cash flow budget. But, you know, there are other things that could make it even more difficult. And just highlighting for what those are, our Medicare provider change in ownership, we are still exchanging emails with them about the transaction and about the banking information. It's just a little, I mean, we responded to all of them today, but it's just a little worrisome that we're still talking about that. Anyway, the other thing that the managed care contracting people, just more educational, I suppose, is that even when yes, they need a new contract, but with a new contract, you also have to get what's called credentialed as a provider with the health plan. Well, you're a new owner, so this entity has to get credentialed as a provider. And what that does is that gets you, the hospital corporation, set up to for the health plan to make payments to you. And if they don't process this either timely or correctly, it could disrupt cash flow, and it may, quite frankly. So a little bit of disruption there, I'm not sure. In the finance and accounting arena and revenue cycle, all three of them, to be honest, we have a few personnel gaps that are going to remain post-closing. So I think we'll talk to remaining staff, Monica, Stephen, and have a plan for you on how to meet those gaps. And several of them have been met and still are being met by prospect. And a couple of them are also being met by Force 10. But I think some of those resources could be retained for a temporary period of time until we get these gaps filled. I hate to bother you with this kind of minute detail, but this whole thing about getting people signers on checking accounts has created more email in my email box than almost anything else. Apparently it's more complex than I knew. And so I think what we know now is that at the closing, I think it's Marcus. One of you is the only person that's going to be able to sign checks for that hospital for the early days, weeks of its operation. I'm just warning you, Marcus, you could be signing a lot of checks. So I think, but the bank says that we're going to need to do this post-closing, or it could literally affect the closing. So try and make that as easy as we can for you, Marcus, but I don't think there'll be any additional signers for a little while. Do you have any questions about that?
I'm just commenting. I'm actively involved in that, and it may not be that bad, but yeah,
Okay.
there's a small risk of that. But I
Okay.
think we have a plan.
We
to
have a
mitigate that.
solution to that?
Yeah, I think so.
I probably didn't read every single email.
No, there's a lot of them. And it depends if you're talking about the district or the hospital. So
I don't even know. All right, next slide. Okay, so this process of executive, I've talked to you so many times about the sheer volume of these things, and I know we brought some of them to you early on in a fashion that I felt was probably for you less than satisfying. You know, you get this big long list, you don't even know what they are. I mean, I think it is going to be a little like that, but here's kind of how we're grouping the remaining contracts. And sort of as you knew already, there are going to be contracts that we reject. And this is through the asset purchase agreement, by the way. That's how it's done. We put them on a list to reject. You would reject a contract either because we don't need that vendor and it's a really old agreement, or because the contract's being replaced with a new contract. And we are desperately working very hard to both have those replacement documents, have lists for you that will describe what is going on. So we'll have a category that is of those. And then, I'm sorry. Okay. Then we'll have a list of contracts that are being assumed. It's a needed vendor. There's no cure amount. Now the board did take action on many in this group already. And then finally, there'll be these new contracts that I described. I mean, this is the best possible outcome with vendors we need, because you totally avoid it. There might be a cure, but you're avoiding it because the vendor is agreeing to start anew with you. And just the past is the past. Say a little bit about the dialogue that we have with vendors is that, you know, that we work very hard to put this hospital back on its feet. And we have many public contributions, both governmental and private philanthropy. And it's not a good use of our money to be paying the former owner's debts. That's really how we start this off. And we have gotten many, many, many vendors to accept them, which is just great. So, but as far as presentations that I was thinking I would make to you, I was thinking I would limit it to vendors of real significance, or vendors where the staff recommendation is to pay the prior owner's debts. And that's, I'll tell you, we're trying to avoid those like the plague. Otherwise, if it's not significant and we're not recommending the payment of cure, my recommendation is that when we go through this document review process with you, these contracts will be available in that review process. I'm happy to answer any questions, et cetera, but I just think, given everything that's going on, I think this is the best use of your time and attention. So I'd like to have your feedback on this. Is this comfortable for you? None of this is comfortable for you, but I mean, given the situation.
I think my question is, if we didn't do it this way and we just went over every contract, and I think it would be extremely overwhelming. I'm guessing that's one of the main reasons we're doing it, or thinking about doing it this way.
That is correct.
Okay.
Because, you know, you recall a couple of the meetings, the one in particular where we had all these vendors, they weren't owed anything. There was no reason not to just accept them. But when you got that list, I think it probably just blurred over. There was no way to walk through them individually and say, oh, let me tell you everything about this vendor. And we'd be having board meetings every day from now until closing.
Do we know what a good qualifying amount would be for, say, like a vendor contract in terms of dollars that would come to us?
That's a good question. Can I get back to you on that?
Yeah, and
Yeah.
one of the things we talked about too, Tony, is that we think it would also be, since we're so close to the, finalizing the transaction, it would also be a good idea to do that under your new leadership, right? Having the Watsonville Hospital leadership work with you and see the type of recommendations that they would make. Because we started to talk about anywhere between 150 to 200K. And so anyways, those are just some thoughts that we've had as well around that.
Those would be the authorities that you give the hospital management for decision-making and check signing.
Appreciate that answer. Thank you.
Okay, well then let's move along. If you think of anything later, let me know.
I don't know how to quantify this, but
Oh.
I'm sorry, let me jump in. It's
Sure.
kind of just asking for feedback in the dollars and risks of the hospital. Something, I would define risk to hospital as a pretty broad statement, and that's risk to hospital operations, but it could also be risk to hospital clients we serve, or the staff who work with vendors or equipment. So
Yeah,
I just think, I just want to be thoughtful about that word hospital, how we look at that, because I think anything that brings
Right.
a risk to us of clients, patients, quality service, or staffing resources.
yeah, and I'm going to discuss a few of those at the end of my presentation today, so you'll get a feel for those. But I appreciate your desire to define that fairly broadly.
And I don't recognize what impact that will be, but I imagine staff can be thoughtful about that.
We'll try. Okay. Next slide. Oh, such good news on this slide. So as I said, every time, all licenses and permits have been applied for. Although we did learn that there are some really surprising to me. There are some that you only apply for after you are operational and have an acute care license. So think imaging, for example, mammography, you don't apply for the license until you're already operating. But anyway, you have some period of time to get that afterwards. Here's the huge one. We did run into a little bit of misunderstanding on the acute care license at a staff level. I think the agency was trying to schedule their survey for September, which would have meant we wouldn't have closed. And thank you to Monica for all her work on this. She got this back on track. There is a date scheduled. They're coming on August 22nd and are committed to issuing that license for close. So thank you, Monica. And pharmacy is complete. And then I think I told you we're waiting now for a temporary permit that they offered to us. Medicare and Medi-Cal. This is all green. Green. Good news. Next slide. Oh, sorry for the small writing. Now I see it on the screen. This is a busy slide. These are the 4 vendor discussions that I thought, at least right now, were certainly worthy of your attention. I've talked about MedHost already. There's no problem here. This is a huge relationship, right? They provide not only the electronic health record to the hospital, but they also are the operator of the financial systems. So all the accounting, all the APAR. So they also do the same for what will now be the district clinic. So this is a really important vendor. They were really skeptical. They had troubles with the former owner and walked into this whole thing in a very skeptical fashion. I think that we've done just a fantastic job trying to band-aid that relationship and improve it. They're pretty happy. They're actually providing transition services to us now. They removed their objection to the sale. But one of the things that I wanted to highlight for you, this is to date, the only contract that we recommend that you pay the prior owner's debt, which is about $200,000. This is in our budget. This isn't above and beyond. But given what we've asked MedHost to do to make this transaction possible, I think that's a very small price to pay. On the not so happy front, and I think we talked about this a little bit earlier too, there's this vendor called Heroic, and they are the provider of a lot of, well, they provide cybersecurity, which is extremely important in healthcare, data storage. So some of the hospital's data is basically controlled by this vendor, retrieval of it, passwords, things like that. And then they provide all the desktop support. And there's been also a very troubled relationship. I think that we've just also had a very difficult time talking to this vendor. It's now the lawyers are talking to this vendor. And we are trying to work towards transition and replacement. There are parts of this contract. So most of the vendors that, in fact, everyone that our IT people know of, all the competitive vendors do it offering. You can get cybersecurity from them, you can get desktop support from them, etc. This company will not do business with us unless we buy every single thing for them. And it actually doesn't make financial sense or operational support to the hospital to have some of these things with an outside vendor. So we are trying to find a transition that would result in exit and replacement of this vendor. The Health Trust, there's a company called Health Trust. We had a staffing company that we recommend rejection because we don't use them anymore. But the other side of Health Trust is the group purchasing organization that the hospital uses today. This is when they buy supplies. Not so much pharmaceuticals, HPG is mainly just on the core supplies. I think I have updated you that we've been looking at the opportunity for supply chain savings, and we've found them. But we can't make a big change here. It takes time. This is when you don't just flip a switch. So we are very committed to trying to get a contract with them that allows for a 90-day termination without cause. We don't have it in any of the proposals that they've given it to date. It is, I want to alert you, it's not all hope is lost. It is that if we can't get a 90-day termination, we do have an alternative here. And it learned so much in bankruptcy. So there is a process we can use whereby the debtor would continue this contract until they themselves dissolve. So it could be, for months or whenever they're done settling their affairs, they would keep it and they would basically offer the services to us. And apparently you can do that. So not to worry too much. There's a way to get this done. But this is a big deal because it is obviously millions and millions of dollars, both in terms of the spend, but also if we can't replace them, there's $1 million or more of savings that's at stake. The last one we have not talked about lately, and that is Philips Medical Capital vis-a-vis the cath lab. So we did go back. We've been attempting to get the financing through Philips Medical Capital for the cath lab. One of the things that vendors have the right to do if you're trying to accept their contract, for example, is that they can demand what they call adequate assurance of future performance. Basically, that's just the enough financial information to get them to believe that you're good for your payments. So, and this whole prior contract is really wrapped up with some problems because that prior contract included the construction subcontractor, and there is a lien on the hospital right now from a construction subcontractor that if it does not clear, we cannot close. This one's kind of complicated. And of course, we want the cath lab, right? Well, their initial review of the buyer, at least on the business side, they decided that they weren't so sure that we were creditworthy in that amount. So again, the lawyers took over. I have a typo here, I'm sorry. The lawyers took over this discussion as well, because we know they're making the wrong decision for them, because they will end up having to pay probably $400,000 if they don't go along with us in getting this in place because of this lien. The lien is arguably theirs to pay. And it honestly, I'm giving you more detail than anybody's head would ever want to get, but I just want to alert you because you took action to approve the cath lab. We have not been able to secure this contract yet. Listen, this is just a financing company. At the end of the day, if you have the cash, which you don't right now, but you've done a pretty good job with philanthropy lately, you could fundraise for this. It's $1 million or so. So don't lose hope, but I just wanted you to know that there's a lot
Cecilia,
of
this is John. Do you know who the subcontractor is on that? Is it a local
called
vendor?
Cowan Construction. I mean, but they kind of have to be local because, yeah, they were working day to day in the hospital. And recall, or maybe you don't because this a lot, but most of that construction work was done. In fact, the hospital was so anxious to get it done that, right or wrong, the hospital actually paid one of their bills when they wanted to keep things moving, even though arguably it was Phillips Medical Capital that had agreed to finance it. Cowan Construction is the name.
Thank you.
I'm not sure, Erwin, but I think this might be my last slide. Is it? Yes, it is. So though I hope, I don't know if this worked for you, but I really just tried to focus on important things. And again, you have the FTI report, which is much, much more detailed. Anything else?
Thank you, Cecilia. Any more questions for Cecilia before we move along? It's interesting how much work has been done in the last week or 10 days. So thank you.
Well, we get close to closing and it's like stuff is
I
happening.
get it. I get it. Okay, thanks, Cecilia. So my agenda tells me that we're going into closed session next. Am I right, Monica?
That is correct, Chair.
And I forgot what we do. Do we adjourn this meeting or are we just going to recess and or
Or
in
do
advance
we
and open-
do we ask for public comment first on this last presentation?
I think it was for
You could
information
do that
only.
if you choose to. Oh, go ahead.
Wasn't Cecilia's-
It was for information only, and I think your board hasn't really developed a policy across the board on whether you're only taking public comment on action items on the regular agenda or on both action items and educational presentations. It's been a little bit inconsistent. So you can choose to do that at some point to create a policy one way or the other. I think it is very important for you to continue to take public comment on action items and less important to take them on educational items, but it's up to your board and within your board's discretion on how you formulate that policy.
So we have a policy to formulate at some time in the future. What's the pleasure of the board on this presentation tonight? Do we want to move on with our agenda or do we want to see if there's anybody in the public that's interested in speaking about it?
As a matter of course, I would default to always allowing the public to have an opportunity to speak. I mean, we generally have so few people participate. I don't see it as a big imposition.
Okay, we can open it to public comment. Erwin, is there anyone that's interested in speaking at this moment?
Sure, Chair. There's only 5 people on the call from members of the public. Anyone wishing to speak on the item we just spoke about, please click on the raised hand option on your screen. I see none, Chair.
Okay, thank you, Erwin. So we'll go ahead and close out the public comment period then on this particular educational item. Thanks again, Cecilia. So do we formally close the meeting and go into closed session, or do we go into recess and go into closed session?
We'll go into recess and go into closed session at this point, and then the clerk will take down in the minutes when the meeting ends, when closed session is over with.
Okay, thank you, Jason. So we declare the meeting, the special meeting of the Pajaro Valley Healthcare Hospital Board in recess at this time, and we'll go into closed session. Erwin, can you do what you need to do to
Can I just ask,
disconnect people?
Chair, do you mind if I just ask a clarifying question? I mean, if we have public members who want to feel like they can just depart. Could we just adjourn this meeting since our next action is closed session? We're done. Could we just adjourn this and go into closed session?
Well, closed session is literally part of the meeting. And so it's part of the board meeting that
Okay.
you're having. So it's really not an important detail. I mean, whether you adjourn and go into closed session or whether you recess and go into closed session is I don't
Thank you for
believe
that clarification.
it's a problem one way or the other.
I think we'll just make it clear that we're not coming back for any action.
We're not coming back for any action. So practically speaking, you are adjourning and there's no reason for the public to stay on. But you are continuing with your meeting in closed session. So
Yeah, that was going to be my question, Jason, is do you or Monica have to make an announcement that there will be any action coming out of this closed session? And then do we need to have public comment before closed session in case people want to comment on things that are in closed session?
the public comment period is the general public comment period is the time for people to comment on closed session items if they want to comment on closed session items. We do not have anything that we are anticipating will be reportable out of closed session tonight. But if there was something that turned out to be reportable, then we would come back on the record and we would report it out.
Thank you.
Sure.
So what do we want to do? Do we want to close out the meeting or go into recess and then open in closed session and report out at the end of that and then officially close the meeting?
I think
Which
the
is
answer, the
usually
official answer to those questions is yes.
Yeah. Okay, so we'll go into recess and open into closed session. So Erwin, would you proceed with disconnecting the appropriate disconnections and we can move on with closed session items?
Sir, let me stop the recording.